Welcome to the Explainer. So, have you ever really thought about what holds a team together, especially after a visionary leader leaves? Well, today we're going to dig into a sermon that tackles that exact question, and it finds a pretty powerful answer in a 2,000-year-old text from the Gospel of John.
I mean, it's a problem you see all the time, right? A star CEO leaves a company, and what happens? The best people start leaving, the vision gets all fuzzy, and sometimes the whole thing just falls apart. And that is the exact crisis facing Jesus' disciples in the story we're exploring.
All right, so let's set the scene. Jesus flat out announces he's leaving. Now, you have to understand, his followers were a group held together almost entirely by the fact that he was physically there. So suddenly, they're facing a future completely on their own. This is a massive, massive problem for them. And the event that really kicks it all into motion is when Judas leaves to betray Jesus. The sermon calls this the point of no return. It's kind of like that moment you tip over the edge of a slide, there's just no going back. That one act locks everything into place, and the leader's exit is now absolutely guaranteed. So, this all leads to this central question, doesn't it? With their unifying leader, their central figure physically gone, what's going to stop this group from just completely dissolving? What on earth is going to be the glue that holds them together and gives them a reason to exist? So, what's Jesus' solution to this? Well, it is not what you would expect. There's no 5-year plan, there's no new management structure, no org chart. Instead, he gives them something completely different to hold on to. And here it is. This is the big reveal. The sermon argues that this verse is the answer. This new commandment is the glue, and you can see how it fundamentally shifts everything. Their unity is no longer about following a specific person, but about practicing a shared principle. But that word new is so important here. I mean, after all, the command to love your neighbor as yourself had been around for a long time. So what makes this one new? Well, the sermon breaks down 3 crucial ways that this commandment is fundamentally different from the old one. All right, let's just walk through this because it's pretty fascinating. First, the recipient changes. This new command is given after Judas, the one who's not on board, has left the room, so it's specifically for the true followers. Second, the direction is now internal. It's all about loving one another within the community. And third, and this is the big one, the standard gets radically elevated. And this new standard is the whole ballgame. It's no longer love others as you love yourself, which, let's be honest, can be a pretty flawed benchmark depending on the day. The new measure is as I have loved you, a completely different kind of standard, one defined by total self-sacrifice and service. This just reframes the entire expectation. Now, this new way of loving, it wasn't just some internal club rule. Nope. It was actually meant to become the group's public identity, their calling card, assigned to the rest of the world. You see, this love was designed to be a new kind of boundary marker, replacing old ones like dietary laws. And think about that for a second. You can totally fake following rules, but faking genuine, sacrificial love, that's incredibly hard to do. So this gives assurance to the people inside the group, and it becomes this powerful, undeniable witness to everyone outside. And this wasn't just a theory. It had a huge, real-world impact. The early writer Tertullian actually quotes a pagan Roman, somebody on the outside looking in, observing the Christians and just saying, see how they love one another. Their love was so different that even their critics couldn't help but stop and notice. It literally became their defining trait. Okay, but as powerful and amazing as this command is, the sermon immediately highlights a massive obstacle. Good old-fashioned human nature, and it uses the disciple Peter as the perfect case study. Isn't this just fascinating? Jesus delivers this profound, community-defining command, and what does Peter do? He completely ignores it. Just blows right past it. He doesn't ask, hey, how do we obey that? He just defaults right back to the old model, Lord, where are you physically going? It's almost as if Peter thinks he's already got the whole love part covered. No problem. And right here, the contrast is just stark. Peter, full of all this self-confidence, declares, I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus immediately counters with a prediction of his total, complete failure. It's this direct clash between human willpower and, well, divine insight. The sermon also highlights that number 3, biblically, it often signifies completeness or fullness. So a threefold denial isn't just a slip-up. It's a prediction of total, absolute failure.
It's meant to show just how incapable Peter is of fulfilling this kind of command on his own.
And this is really the sermon's ultimate point, driven home by Peter's failure. This Christ-like love, it's just not something you can achieve through sheer willpower. It requires a fundamental internal change, an empowerment from a divine source, which the text says is something that comes later. For now, Peter just had to.
So all of this leaves us with a pretty provocative final question to think about. If a community's main defining trait isn't its list of beliefs or its rules or even its leader, but the tangible, sacrificial love its members have for each other, what does that actually look like in practice today? What would that kind of group look like in our world?